Welcome back to the Unapologetically Neurodivergent podcast, the show where we drop the mask, drop the shame, and get to the brutal honesty about what it's really like living with a neurospicy brain. I'm James, the fitness and mind coach, and today I'm joined by someone who's been in the neurodivergent trenches for absolute decades. Her name? Hannah Bookbinder. If you've ever felt like you're permanently behind, drowning in sticky notes, or just allergic to normal, you're going to want to stick around for this one. Quick heads up before we get rolling. This podcast is unfiltered. We talk about the messy stuff. So if you're here for polished, fake positivity, you are in the wrong place. So it's lovely to have you on the podcast, Hannah. What we like to do, we just crack straight on. So why don't you introduce yourself to the guests that are listening? Just tell me about your day-to-day and what you do for a living.
Well, James, first of all, thank you for having me here today. And it's great to be talking about one of my life's passions, which is ADHD and neurodivergence. I am an ADHD and executive functioning skills coach. I've been working with individuals in this demographic for almost 30 years. And I work with people across the lifespan, so kindergarten to 12th grade, and then college, graduate school, and adults. As I'm sure you know, there are a number of adults who are being diagnosed late in life, and it's sort of this aha, validating moment to, finally have an explanation for why things were difficult or, interesting to say the least. And that's what I do.
Sounds amazing. And yeah, that validation part, even for myself, who was quite very open about just me, yeah, I was surprised how much weight it lifted off my shoulders. So what was it that made you get into that field 30 years ago? What was it that piqued your interest, or did you stumble across it by accident?
The short answer is yes, and, I had gone into the mental health field, knowing that I wanted to help people, and my story starts with my very first, client who had ADHD, and they basically had me at hello because the parents brought him to my office and said, "Fix him, he's a hot mess. He's late with his assignments, he's disrupting the class, we're fighting with him at home. You can follow the whole trail of his belongings wherever he goes throughout the entire house. Figure him out and let's make this better." And I said, "Okay." And when he came in, he was a little surly, but he was willing to engage, as is frequently the case. And we started to peel away the layers. And what quickly became apparent to me, James, was the fact that this is not a bad kid. This is not a kid who's acting this way because he wants to. He doesn't come home from school and say, "Hey, I'm bored. Let's fight with mom and dad." He was really trying to keep putting one foot in front of the other, and in working together, once we realized what was happening for him, that he has ADHD, then we started to identify strategies and tools that would be helpful for him, creating scenarios and structures in the home and at school that would help to promote the stability and the regular routine that he needs. And he started to become successful. He was participating appropriately in class. He got his assignments handed in. I connected him with a psychiatrist so that he could be properly medicated, recognizing that meds are not always appropriate for individuals, but for this particular child it was. And it was quiet at home. It was the usual rambunctious noise, but there was not as much fighting. And to be a part of that experience where you're taking somebody who has been labeled as being difficult and defiant and a hot mess, and realizing that underneath all of that is somebody who is incredibly smart and really wants to succeed, was really impactful to me. So that experience is what basically paved the way for me to continue doing what I've been doing, working with thousands of people ever since.
Yeah, and I can imagine also back then, um, there wasn't much in terms of splitting that ADHD and that autism and the neurodivergence away from like clear cut mental health. Even with myself, when I run a mental health CIC,
Mhm.
where we introduce physical activity to people with mental health, we were still including people with ADHD and autism, and back then it was called Asperger's as well, because it was still being linked into that mental illness label, wasn't it?
Correct.
And I gathered that's where that realization now with late diagnosis, where people
Right.
are finding, oh, actually, it's, and like yourself, you broke down those layers, whereas before it was, he was just like labeled this disruptive, sort of
Right.
like I said, hot mess.
Right. And I think it's really easy to place that label onto somebody because then you can categorize them. This is the good kid, this is the bad kid. Let's proceed. And it's not that simple because you're really depriving that individual the opportunity to be successful and meet their potential if we're just going to be overly simplified and say, well, he's just a bad kid.
Yeah, and 100%. And I think I can relate to that myself. Like I was late diagnosed with autism and ADHD, but looking back, I realized the missed opportunities.
Mhm.
I'm very grateful that I'm successful in what I've done and carried on with, but there are plenty of missed opportunities that could have been caught by the teachers or my parents if they knew. So you're basically giving those people, and by breaking that down, those opportunities to succeed earlier on in life rather than like, like drag themselves through it and discover it by themselves.
Right. And we're preventing them from experiencing years of unnecessary emotional trauma and shame that comes with all of the struggles that an undiagnosed individual has when it comes to neurodivergence, you know? And sometimes that humiliation and shame and all of the emotional turmoil that they experience has far-reaching repercussions for a lot of their lives.
Yeah, and how does it differ in like over there in America? Because over here we're very reliant on the national health system. Going private is very expensive and very expensive long term as well for people like in here in this country. What is the sort of process to get that diagnosis or that validation officially compared to what it is like over here?
So for kids who are in school, the parents can request of the school district an evaluation because they suspect that there's ADHD or something that's going on, and the schools have 60 days, 60 school days to respond to that request, and the request has to come in writing. And then they do an evaluation and share the results with the family, and then the family works with the school to implement the appropriate accommodations, either in the form of a 504 or an IEP. Do you guys have those there in England?
No.
Okay. So these are accommodation documents that say that the school has to abide by this accommodation. So for some examples would be extended test time. Instead of just having the hour, they have time and a half, or they have an extra 50% on the time. They have preferential seating. They have access to teacher notes, or to a student who has, strong note-taking skills. They can get a copy of those notes. Distraction-free test environment is also a popular accommodation as well. And for adults, it's a little bit trickier because you're out of the system, so to speak. So if you suspect that you have ADHD, you could start with your general practitioner or your doctor, and then they could refer you to a psychologist who could evaluate you, and then they'll put you through the full battery and confirm or disprove that you have this. And then it would be the same idea. They would refer you to a psychiatrist or psychologist, whether if they thought that you needed medication, or, working with somebody like me who's a coach who could give them some skills and strategies to address these challenges.
Yeah, it's very different. I think a lot of us rely on that government funding and the we say it's free. It's not. We still have to pay it out of our wages before anything else. But
Right.
like even the resources is so strained that even children have to wait. So my son is going through the process or the pathway, as we call it, and he got given an 18-month waiting list before he would even get seen.
80?
Eighteen
Like
month,
80?
18.
Oh,
No,
80.
10. 1 8, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Okay.
still an 18-month, which is different to the 90 days. And then the school are not obliged to do anything until he has official diagnosis because they're funded once the diagnosis has been made and not prior. He is very fortunate. He is in a really sort of diverse school, and so
Mhm.
they have things like that already in place. But with a school with a lesser funding opportunities, there would be no opportunity for him to have
Yep.
a quiet corner or a reading space, or for the teacher to check up on him, or change, maybe tweak their teaching methods for him.
Right.
Um, so yeah, so to hear that they've got 90 days to respond or 60 days to
Yeah,
respond
60
is,
days. But
yeah, it's good because it
it's
helps.
good, but that's a long 60 days.
Yeah.
That's, 60 school nights of fighting and turmoil and blood, sweat, and tears, and, to your point, James, for our schools that have limited budgets, whether they're city schools or rural, communities, some of the schools don't have the resources for that, so you have to hope that the kids who need it are with a teacher who just happens to have the bandwidth and the talent to empower these kids within the classroom. And that's a tall order considering everything that students and teachers are dealing with these days.
Yeah, 100%. And I think we're very fortunate that like our schools are quite progressive in that, in terms of the government quite cracked down in terms of like these schools need to have the tools in place. But yeah, I think I'd much rather 60 school days than 18 months.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Because as parents, you sort of start to doubt, don't you? You start to blame you and turning, and being neurodivergent ourselves, and
Mhm.
it's very overwhelming at home, and a lot of neurodivergent parents, there's probably one or if not both who are neurodivergent to neurodivergent children.
Yeah.
And so you do struggle with it, and then you start comparing, which we all know comparison is the thief of joy. Like,
Yes.
and you do,
That's a dark
and
rabbit hole.
yeah, yeah. And I think like it's that sometimes you wish that, because he he's quite does quite well at school. Sometimes you wish he was at school what he was like at home, just so they'd
Mhm.
hurry that 18 months along.
Yeah.
Um,
And schools, I
so
think,
like,
don't appreciate the behind the scenes that goes on at home because the kid could be perfectly angelic in class, participating, appropriate with behavior, and they see that the kids in particular who are earning high marks on their report cards, they fall between the cracks because there's no evidence to support their need for an evaluation or any kind of accommodation. And the parents are begging and pleading. It's almost as if they need to take a video of what's going on at home for the teachers to realize and appreciate what all the blood that is pouring off of that A, you know?
and we have been advised to do that, not necessarily for the teachers, for documentation further down the line. Um, but it's also that if you're not forthcoming or understanding, or you're not really sure, it's it's that you're not even making it aware to the teachers, like even for yourselves. Luckily for us, like I said, we're very open about it,
Mhm.
about the way we are at Quirks, mental health, etc. So as soon as we started recognizing it, I went up to his teacher and went, right, this is what we suspect.
Right.
We're not we're not telling you to shadow him. Just keep an eye. If you think things are off, let us know. If
Mhm.
we think things are extra off at home, we'll let you know, and vice versa.
Right.
And we we've had that working relationship with the teachers, thankfully, which has kept him going. But it's it's still that they can't do nothing because he's not showing it as such there. Um, so yeah, so us personally, we were looking at going through like the GP route now, because it
Mhm.
does get quite hard at home
Yeah.
until that waiting list sort of shortens, or that time shortens. But are you finding you're working with the parents as much as you're working with their children, because it's just that home dynamic as well that's a struggle?
Yes, and part of it is helping the parents to understand what's going on with their kids because I was just having this conversation earlier today where the parents will call in during the vetting process that I have and they'll say, he can sit there for 4 hours and do his video games, but he can't sit down and write a paper. And that's an educational, teachable moment where you can say, look, the neurodivergent mind is constantly seeking hits of dopamine. And that's what the video game does. It's very exciting, it's intriguing, they're problem solving, and it's moving at a very fast pace. The opposite is true for writing a paper about, the relationship between this biological phenomenon and this one. It's not sexy and it's not exciting. And, so I can appreciate why he or she doesn't want to sit there for 4 hours ad nauseum writing a paper. And so they understand it. And that's part of why I wrote the book of Unlock Your Inner Superhero, Conquering the Challenges of ADHD, because it started off as a resource for the kids because while there are a lot of outstanding resources out there, not very many of them speak directly to the kid themselves. And so I wanted a resource that would validate their experience, show them that somebody's there to support them, and give them some empowering tools along the way. But interestingly, what I have found is that it's a great handbook for the adults in their lives. So whether it's a parent, a teacher, a coach, even doctors, they use it and they realize all the challenges that come with living a day with ADHD. And that's part of that educational process where you point out to the adults, look, this is what your kid is facing. The humiliation in class or the inner negative conversations that take place, that self-criticism is so noisy sometimes. And it really helps them to better parent or coach or support the kids in an appropriate kind of a way.
Are you also finding that you're sometimes dealing with parents who don't really realize that they're neurodivergent themselves, and then they have that sort of aha moment as you're breaking down those barriers with their children, and they're like, "Oh, yeah, that makes sense."
Yeah. And they will say, "I see a lot of me in him or her," and I've had conversations with them where either I'm pointing out that they themselves, in a very gentle way, might be on the autistic spectrum, or that they too might be struggling with executive functioning skills. And they, for the most part, are welcoming of that feedback because in the end, it's only going to help the parents to help themselves. It's kind of like when you fly in an airplane and they have that whole safety presentation and they tell the parents that you need to put on your oxygen mask first, which seems counterintuitive, before you help Junior. You have to be the best version of yourself if you're going to parent effectively. So if you're not taking care of yourself and your needs first, then you're of no use to the rest of the family. So they're usually very receptive to that. I can't think of a time when that hasn't been received. I won't say well received, but received.
Yeah, and I think as parents, we don't sometimes want to put our own oxygen mask on first
Right.
because it's a lot easier if we don't, to be aware. Although
Yeah.
it's not actually a good idea, it's just easier.
Right. It is easier. And it's also, I think that we prioritize our kids' well being and success over ours. Which, I mean, it makes sense. I'm guilty of that. But it's important to get your rest and make sure you're eating well and taking care of what it needs to be taken care of for yourself.
That's awesome. Hannah, are you neurodivergent yourself at all?
I am not. I just fell in love with all of you guys because I love working with people who have this, and I don't necessarily see it as a weakness. I just see it as a part of who people are. We all have a challenge, great or small, and this is just what is part of the puzzle of James Wheeler or whoever it is that we're talking to or working with. And the question is, are we going to let that thing define us, or are we going to figure out a way to harness it and use the strengths that we have to empower us so that we can um, be who we want to be and meet the goals that we have for ourselves?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like you said, I was late diagnosed, but I was always acceptant of who I am and my quirks as such. And it's quite fitting, really, that um, your book about like putting the word superhero in there because I always relate to this anime called My Hero Academia, where they're talking about that everyone has a quirk, everyone has
Mhm,
these different types of superpower.
mhm.
Um, and everyone's a superhero, and it's the people without the quirks that which are the odd ones out. But
Right.
it's all about accepting that difference as just part of yourself, and regardless of the label. And I've been through many trying to discover myself, um, and it yeah, and we shouldn't sort of isolate ourselves, and we shouldn't sort of like shepherd ourselves in a corner. We should
Mm-mm.
embrace it, and people like yourselves encourage that to for others to be embraced, a part of it.
Yeah, and James, I think that that commonality, like what sets you apart from others and what sets me apart from others, is the thing that we have in common. Even though it might be different, what our differences are, that's what ties us together as human beings. And if we can just come to the point of understanding that, then I think that we are better positioning ourselves to better support each other.
Are you also finding that you like when you're dealing with other people, and do you deal with the support network around them, or do you just deal with directly that person? So you deal with the
No,
support
we
network.
we form a whole, supportive network, so that can include for kids, that's gonna include the teachers, guidance counselors, a therapist if they're involved with a psychiatrist, or sometimes even the general practitioner. For adults, it's gonna include the general practitioner or their psychiatrist or psychologist, sometimes even their spouse or family member, because sometimes we're having adult kids who are, in their 30s and 40s who are referred by their parents. And so, we're partnering with the parents in as much as the identified client feels comfortable. I mean, obviously, there's issues about confidentiality and stuff like that. And you don't want to, emasculate or humiliate somebody who's already feeling pretty humiliated by the time they walk into your door too. So, we work together with them and we are in constant communication with each other so that we can all be consistent with the type of support that we offer.
Are you finding that you're getting resistance from the people from the support network that you're connecting to, because that misconception that reasonable adjustment is going to be quite extreme, when really sometimes it's something quite minuscule that makes such a huge difference?
Yes, I will tell you that I won't work with somebody who is from the get go not willing to engage and do this work. Because my experience has been that it just becomes an exercise in futility and it makes things worse for the individual. So if they want to come back to it and revisit it at any point, my door is always open. But for those who are willing to take the first step through the door and in having that course of the conversation where we are discussing possible changes and scenarios and that kind of a thing, um, we discuss what feels uncomfortable about the proposed change, and sometimes we can strike a compromise, and sometimes we can sort of demystify the anticipated difficulty that's going to happen, and they realize, okay, well, this feels uncomfortable, but I'm willing to give it a try. And I think that it also helps them to know that at least when they're working with me, I'm going to be there every step of the way. So if it starts to get scary, if it starts to get uncomfortable, then they just have to reach out with an SOS and ask for assistance. And it's kind of like speaking of SOS, it's kind of like the SOS feature in my app. I put that in there so that when people start to feel overwhelmed about a particular task or responsibility, they can learn the art of advocacy by just engaging with that particular tool so that they can say, on the one hand, hey, James, I'm working on something amazing. I just want to let you know because now I know that you know that I'm working on something and I'm more likely to follow through on it. Or if there's a task that feels particularly difficult, then I will ask you to check back in with me. So I think that if they can learn how to advocate for themselves, if they can trust how I will be there, then they start to move forward a little bit. And once they see that it's not so bad, then we start to pick up traction.
Yeah, excellent stuff. One, and kind of a nice little segue as well. Why don't you tell us more about this app? Is My Toad, I believe it's called. Tell
Yes.
us what it is, like why you felt it was needed in an industry, Especially, I feel one that's starting to grow a lot more than what it was. Like you said, you've been in the industry for 30 years. I myself have been in like the mental health industry for close to 15. It has evolved very quickly, and it seems that lately it's evolving even quicker. So, yeah, did you see that gap that was needed, and that's why you built the app?
Yeah, I think that you have to understand, and obviously you do, the challenges that come with neurodivergence and ADHD in order to understand the app. TOAD stands for time management, organization, accountability, and dialing in. And those are four very important executive functioning skills. And, many people who have ADHD struggle with that concept of time. They have time blindness. So if they say, for example, I'm just going to scroll for 5 minutes, and the next thing you know, 2 hours have passed by, that's an example of time blindness. This app helps to address that. There are people who can't keep track of their belongings, and they, like I said before, they leave a whole trail of their belongings throughout the house or across the office or in the car. And this app trains them how to be more responsible and mindful of where they're putting their things, so the next time they need their keys, their AirPods, their water bottle, whatever it is, they have a record of where it is, and they have been training themselves to put things in a proper place because everything has a home, or theoretically it's supposed to. The attention part of things, people sometimes who have ADHD, it's very difficult for them to focus. So we created a dialing in set of tools that creates ambient noise, all kinds of choices. If you're an athlete, if you love nature, if you love music, it's there. We also have timers to help people with their um, difficulties with time. And the point is that there are so many things that we have to attend to in the course of a day, and this app takes all of those things and puts them down into one location, so your flow state is constantly intact. You're not going outside of an app for a reminder or timing device. Everything that you need to be successful is right here, and therefore you're going to be more productive, and you're going to lower your stress and your anxiety, which I think at the end of the day, regardless of what we're doing, is what we want to accomplish anyway.
100%. And it's interesting you mentioned all those things, because those are something that I've had to discover along the journey, that I needed. And so I do have, like, sort of like you're talking about ambient noise, I will put on a film if I need to
Right.
focus and get work done. If I'm always losing things, and the most used feature of my Apple Watch is the find my phone bleepy thing, because it's always there. And time management was again something that I had to learn. But
Mhm.
if I wasn't in that state of mind, and a lot of neurodivergents aren't, because they're being either no they don't know, or they're being late diagnosed, then that's to try and implement that stuff by themselves so late on, it would be hard, because it's taken me nearly 10 years to, like,
Yeah.
finally tune all of that. So,
Right.
yeah, this app sounds wonderful. I do actually have it downloaded, but typical
Oh, awesome.
neurodivergent, I've not gone into it properly yet. Um, so yeah, I'll look forward to what, like, opening it up and having a play, and seeing if I can swap some of those, like you say, they're everywhere,
Yeah.
into one centralized location.
And the really cool thing about the app, or one of the cool things, is that there is so much prefabrication in the app. A lot of difficulties that some people who have ADHD have is this whole initiation process. They can't even get the first word out. So, your prompts are already figured out for you, where you want to more appropriately store your phone or your AirPods is already there in a list, and ideas for where to store them, or where you would lose them, are already there. So I did a lot of thinking for the user so that this could be as user friendly as possible. And I will love to hear what you think about it after you use it.
Oh, I can't wait to use it. It's just ironically fell right on top of the holidays here, so my children are off, and I'm playing daddy daycare for the week. So
Ah,
my
very nice.
so my watertight routine has gone completely out of whack, which for a lot of neurodivergents would send them spiraling. To be fair,
Yes. Well, all
uh,
the better. Use my Toad app for.
Yeah, if I can manage to actually pick up my phone without one of them needing my attention.
Right.
But
How many kids do you have?
I have two. I have a 7-year-old and a 2-year-old, and they're both
Okay.
boys. So
You're very busy, James.
yeah, yeah. And then the 7-year-old is the one who's currently on the pathway. So his days are, like you said, a hot mess, bouncing off the walls. They could
Right.
start from any mood to really chirpy to little demon child. So,
Right.
but but I think like that puts me also in a really fortunate position where I know who I am, so we could see that and we could see it early. Which sadly, a lot of parents, like we've discussed, a lot of parents don't have that privilege, and so it's really helpful for someone like yourself who can help break down that with their children as well as themselves, like
Right.
vicariously. And it's really good that you're doing that. So I can imagine, obviously respecting confidentiality, but you must have some really sort of like heartwarming stories about that sort of eureka moment, that when someone discovers something. Are you able to share any of those with our listeners?
Yeah, there are some that I put into the book, but it's always very exciting when, for example, I have a student I'm working with now, and that self-advocacy is really tricky for them because there's a lot, which is true for a lot of people. There's a lot of humiliation and humbling that comes with asking for help, because it's an admission of, I don't know what I think that I should know. And I always give my little 2 cents talk about how, advocacy is beneficial for you, but it's also beneficial for the person that you're asking for help from. For example, I talked to him about how teachers love when their kids ask for help, because it shows that they care and they're invested and they care about maybe the subject. So it kind of strokes the teacher's ego a little bit, which means then in return, if you're falling behind on an assignment or something, they might be more likely to lend you a bone and say, okay, I'm going to give you an extension of 5 days, or, two, maybe not 5 days, a couple of days to make sure that you get everything that you need put together and there won't be any penalty. And the other is that it gives them the opportunity to spout off about information that maybe they couldn't do in class because they're confined to a 30-minute lecture. So, he went in and he asked for help, and this was a particularly difficult teacher because she was very rigid with what her expectations were. And I really try to point out to students that sometimes the hardest teachers are the ones that you're going to learn from the most. The ones who are sort of wishy-washy and warm and fuzzy and unpredictable, it's
Yeah.
very difficult for kids to learn, especially who are neurodivergent. And he went in for his help, and he has come to realize that she is not as tough as he thought she was, that she was indeed holding him to a high bar, and that he now understands what it is that he's supposed to do to be successful in her class. Um, and so they kind of have an understanding, and they have this sort of secret communication that goes on between the two of them in class, so that he doesn't have to be humiliated when he's going to be called on by her. She sort of puts a hand on his shoulder to let him know that the next question is going to be for him. And then he has a way of asking her for help without, having to go through the whole humiliation process in front of his peers. So that's a win right there.
Yeah, 100%. I think any sort of neurodivergent that's listening as well will one probably relate to those struggles, being in school and sort of that second guessing and overthinking, and two, just feel that hope, if not for them, then for the potential children growing up, that there is a way and there are people out there like yourselves and the teachers that are open minded to those little tweaks that go a long way. And I think a lot of us neurodivergents, we hold ourselves to such a high standard, but
Mhm.
also mainly because everyone else holds us to a high standard because they see our potential. But the struggle is we can't connect the dots between our standard and our potential because there's a miscommunication happening there. And I deal the same with with sports coaching and like PT, and so I specialize in neurodivergence with physical activity, and it's that slight miscommunication that is making the biggest barrier. And is once you click, like you said, and the work you've done to break that down, you probably can see how much more and how quickly he's growing now from that moment that was holding him back.
Absolutely, and those moments, by the way, can come in the least likely places. I have another story about an athlete. I think they were on a soccer team or something, and, somehow the coach, because coaches usually don't get looped into the support team, but the coach got looped in, and, he was all bark and bluster and not really approachable, but he somehow got the message to me that he too was neurodivergent, and that was part of his bark and bluster because he saw a lot of himself in his athletes. And I told this athlete to go and speak with their coach and just see what would happen. And they came back to me and they said, "Oh my gosh, Hannah, the coach, he knows exactly what I'm talking about because he's lived this, and now that coach is the point person for this kid so that when they need help in school, they go to the coach and the kid kind of strategize, okay, who's the teacher you should be talking to about this or whatever. It's almost like the coach is serving as a guidance counselor for this kid, even though the kid has a guidance counselor. And I thought that that was really cool because the kid can have a relationship with somebody outside of the classroom, but still within the parameters of school and experience that support.
Yeah, 100. And I personally can relate to that story as well. So over here, I had a spell where I played American football, and I was a running back, but I was never a starter. But I was always like deemed as decent, and it would beat me up how I couldn't progress because there was just something that was a different quality. So we changed coaches, and I also sort of started practicing what I preached. And then,
Yeah.
lo and behold, I improved. I become starter. I won 2 consecutive MVP awards, and
Wow.
it was all from sort of changing that. Hang on, I'm trying to fit within this neurotypical coaching method when I'm not. So it's made that tweaks, and again, it's someone like yourself able to highlight that, point that out, bring in those networks, and go, okay, let's try it. We've tried this way. Let's try something different, completely
Right.
out the box to what you're used to, and lo and behold, it starts to work.
Yeah, because the definition of insanity is like trying the same thing over and over and over again and expecting that something is going to change and be different. So yeah, I think that those moments when, using the phrase that you use of outside the box thinking, I love those because so much can happen when we do that. And I think truthfully that the world, if we would just sometimes engage in outside of the box thinking, then we can solve so many problems that we otherwise continue to try to address, but not successfully.
Yeah, and I also think that you've mentioned it a few times, and it seems like it's quite a cornerstone in your teachings as well. Is that speak up? It doesn't have to be publicly, but it's that reach out for help, be honest and open with yourself, and sort of embrace the fact that you're neurodivergent. And I myself done it with a job of recent. I just basically come out and said, I don't do grey. You need to explain things in black and white. Making
Mhm.
assumptions doesn't help for me. And those sort of teachings and the work that you're doing, it makes a neurodivergent life so much easier. But it's that getting that confidence to embrace it. So it's really nice to hear that that's part of it as well. It's like, look, step forward, like be proud of who you are, ask for
Mhm.
help, because the
Mhm.
people that are going to be receptible to that are the ones you want around to help you. And the people who are not going to be receptible to that, then you kind of need to shut the door to them anyway, because they're not going to offer you anything going forward. And it's really nice to hear that you encourage that sort of like attitude to things as well.
Yeah, and I think that it's also important as somebody who's on their team to solicit the opinions of the individuals that you're working with and not roll in and say, "Okay, I'm here, knight in shining armor, I'm gonna rescue you." Because maybe my idea of what that looks like based on my experience is gonna be different for the individual I'm working with. I mean, all of my clients have neurodivergence, but their experience of it can be very, very different, even if on paper they're identical. So I think having their participation in it and their ability to voice their opinions and be able to say, this is what's important to me, this is what holds me back, and I'm kind of keen to try this, but you can forget about that. That's really helpful.
Yeah, 100%. And so one of the questions I like to always ask my guests, and bearing in mind that you've probably dropped a ton of advice already, is normally if if you were to give that one single bit of golden nugget advice to someone who's just discovering they're neurodivergent or not quite sure or just on the start of their journey, what would that golden nugget bit of advice be that you feel would make their transition, their journey a lot easier than if they didn't have it, basically?
First of all, don't forget the many strengths that you have already. Like, there are built-in features of you that are awesome, and you don't need to change them, but hold on to them and recognize that people like myself, we're out there and we're there to help you and to empower you to find your way. There is no shame in asking for help. It's one of the most powerful steps that you could ever take. And you are amazing individuals, and just with some time and some effort, you're going to make it. But you got to take that first step in asking for help and remember that, who you are, and be true to yourself, and hold on to your strengths.
Excellent. And probably one of the hardest things to do as well. It's so important to do that, but it's extremely hard. I've noticed, especially as a personal trainer, long before neurodivergence, is that trying to sort of get people to believe you have their best interests at heart and try and entice them out. And so, look, I'm not just here to sort of sell your product. I genuinely want you to want to be helped. I can see that you're just on the cusp of becoming great in whatever. I just need you to take that first step. I can't drag you. It's not going to work. I can't trick you into coaching or whatever it is. That's not going to work either, especially for neurodivergence. We'll just shut up shop and hide away. Um, so do you find that as well, that if you have someone who just rushes into something, they don't tend to be as committed as if to someone that takes a little bit longer to sort of entice them? Or are you just fortunate that people find you at the exact point that they need you?
I rarely have somebody who rushes in because there are just so many micro steps that you have to take in order to get this ball rolling. I definitely have those who are much more enthusiastic than others. But like I said, I won't engage with somebody who's just like, that's a hard, cold no. I'm not doing this. Um, but yeah, if they are guns a-blazing and they are enthusiastic about empowering themselves, then it makes it so much easier than if it's somebody who is mostly enthusiastic, but still resistant. But I think that that's less of the issue than it is that if you have somebody who has a willingness, however great or small, eventually they're going to start to take off with this in their own way, and they will start to be able to put the pieces together in the scaffolding so that they can have their routines, they can identify their tools that work for them. Whether it's just gamification and things that they're doing themselves, or using external tools like my book or my app, or any other kind of device that's helpful for them. There are all kinds of ways to be successful, and different things work for different people. So eventually they all do start to turn things around. They just need to have that little bit of a seed planted in them that says, yeah, okay, I'm open to this, because what's been happening is not working. And I would add one other thing, and that is that no matter how defeated they feel, it's important for them to also remember how resilient and resourceful they are, because you're still standing on your 2 feet. You haven't given up. You keep getting back up again despite the humiliation and the difficulties that you're facing, whether it's in the classroom, at home, in your office, whatever. you have the wherewithal. You have that framework. Now we just have to, spruce it up with the stucco or the bricks or the stone and, make sure that you're standing on your own 2 feet consistently.
Yeah, beautifully said. So you've created a ton of resources, a book and an app. Why don't you tell the viewers and the listeners exactly how they can get their hands on that sort of resource?
So the book, all of our information is available at www.mytoadapp.com. That's mytoadapp.com. You can download the app right now on the Apple Store. We're working on the Android version, and we're also speaking with schools, by the way, to get it onto the computer so that kids in class can use it. And any schools that are out there and listening to this, I would love to talk with you about bringing it to your school. And for the book, you can go onto my website and buy it directly from the website, or you can go to Amazon or Instagram. It's available in audiobook as well. So any of your favorite audiobook vendors have it as well. And we also have it in ebook version too.
That's awesome. Hannah, it's been an absolute privilege to speak to you, and it's so wonderful to hear all the great things that you're doing and all those bridges that you're building and making those connections between like neurodivergence and their struggles and breaking those barriers down in such a humane way as well, and making it feel so fluid and normalized, for lack of a better word.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't want this to seem like people are aliens from another,
Yeah.
world. We like I said before, we all have something that makes us different and unique. This ADHD and neurodivergence is just one of those things, and, I'm here to just make it a little bit better.
Excellent. Thank you so much for spending the time to speak to me today, and I'll look forward to speaking to you in the future.
I welcome that. This was terrific. Thank you, James.